Hello and welcome to the hard sell where the stick in the swill bucket has now rattled back 200 times over very nearly 10 years. How the hell that's happened, I don't know, but it has. And because, as a number, it's both big and round, something interesting has to be done. So I've decorated the set with the biggest banner Movie Storm has to offer, irrelevant though it is, and I've got a plate of cheese and pineapple on sticks, carefully off camera, because I can't actually make it in this programme. Someone please make a new version. But what should the actual subject matter be? Party favours?
You gotta glitter, just keep this spray 18 beautiful inches away and glitter, girl.
Dance go glitter, smooth go glitter, fun go glitter, come on go glitter.
The number 200?
If we were to tell you that the restyled 1.3 or 1.6 litre rovers could come to you for less money than a dozen sets of professional golf clubs, that you might find rather incredible. But then, from only £6,790, the Rover 200 series is rather an incredible motor car.
Good luck finding half an hour's worth of adverts that fit those vague criteria. Ultimately, I decided that since it's a singular seminal event, well, it is for me anyway, I'd examine another one by rewinding to the very start of an advertising era. Not the advertising era. Much as I would love to do the very first commercial break in British history, the one from Associated Rediffusion in 1955 that started with Gibbs SR toothpaste suspended in ice, the rest of the break obviously doesn't exist anymore, and would be hard, if not impossible, to reconstruct. At least for me and the resources at my command. But there's more than one beginning in the history of British advertising. After all, it wasn't until the late 80s that broadcasting started to cover every second of every day, even just in some regions. It was a slow 30-year creep from evenings to mornings to late at night. Probably the biggest and most important change, at least for the advertisers, was the start of breakfast television. A completely new and, experiments in Yorkshire notwithstanding, unexplored broadcasting territory. There was no way of knowing what kind of potential consumer would be up and actively watching the television as early as 6 in the morning. To the earliest days of the UK's first commercial breakfast television service, which was of course TVAM, saw advertisers throwing all sorts of ideas and breakfast-related imagery at the wall to see if any of them would stick.
I decided to wake myself up early this morning for breakfast TV. But first, the breakfast. Kellogg's cornflakes, made with 140 days of sunshine and packed with vitamins and minerals. Now for the TV.
This morning is about the evolution of the Ethiopian aardvark, a little known and uninteresting animal.
Eventually they figured out that people are people whatever time of day it is, and the advertising settled down to more or less the same as any other time of day. Still audience targeted, of course, but with few to no explicit references to breakfast and mornings, which were all over the place at the outset. You'll see what I mean. Of course, TV historians will know that the earliest days of TVAM had its problems apart from that, in the same way that the surface of the sun is kind of warm. You can watch the ITV in the Face episode for more information on the specifics. Suffice to say here that a disastrous misjudgment of tone, under preparation, under rehearsal, general complacency and just plain bad luck saw the entire station all but collapse within a month. One of those strokes of bad luck was the lack of advertising. Partly because the value of these time slots was a literal unknown at the start, and quickly crashed altogether as TVAM's ratings plummeted near zero, and that's not an exaggeration. But mostly because of an ongoing dispute between Equity and the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising that was already fucking over Channel 4. The IPA were angling for less pay for actors appearing in adverts on 4, because it was a minority channel and wouldn't get the ratings. Equity, quite understandably, threw a wobbly, and effectively went on strike from advertising on Channel 4 from its launch in November 1982. This was still ongoing 4 months later when TVAM arrived, and came to cover them as well. which, in practice, meant few to no adverts showing equity members doing any actual acting, although voiceovers were still covered, which meant strange, echoing commercial breaks set in apparently abandoned worlds. Again, you'll see what I mean. One last caveat before we get started. My source for this broadcast is an on-air recording, which means a significant amount of the picture is covered with time codes and other digital information. Sorry about that. Also, the sound in places is a bit knackered. It is 40 years old. Right, that's the scene well and truly set. Let's do this stupid idea. Good morning, Britain. So the TVAM started with a 5-minute schmoozing session courtesy of the famous Five.
Hello, good morning and welcome to TVAM. New studios, a new news service and a new national network.
Only 2 of whom survived 40 years and 6 months later. Specifically the 2 women. Probably just goes to show something, that. Anyway, in February 1983 they're all alive and all very happy to be here and broadcasting at last, and hope you'll stick around for at least the next 8 years. Of course, TVAM as originally conceived doesn't last 8 weeks. The shiny sofa, Mad Lizzie, Wincy Willis, Anne Diamond pointing at newspapers version of TVAM that everyone remembers has almost nothing in common with it but the name, the logo and the studio. But no one knows that yet. For all they know, this show's going to turn out to be much more fun than eating a bowl of yeast. So to the first advert, which comes between the 5-minute intro and the first programme proper, Daybreak. And of course we all know it.
Morning, I'm Ian Melrose, I'm from Walls, and I'd like to welcome you to Walls Breakfast Television.
It's the famous sizzling advert for Walls Sausages and Bacon, fronted by Ian Melrose, their marketing and sales director, who is obviously not a member of Equity. This advert's famous enough that it's been covered on this show more than once in the previous 199 episodes. It's the 80s equivalent to the Gibbs SR toothpaste ad that started the whole nightmare. A new era begins, and it's awkward as all fuck. Which turns out to be appropriate and prophetic.
It's my job to make sure there's plenty for everyone. We'll feature some big and tasty names.
Melrose does his best to sell you the stuff, but ultimately crashes against the brick wall of anti-charisma. Despite this, he continued to be heard, if not seen, on TVAM scheduled Walls adverts for a little while longer, even after the dispute.
Walls pork pies with the rich, crisp pastry are great at any time of the day.
Presumably, Walls were hoping that viewers had taken him to their hearts. In fact, as I believe I've pointed out before, the sausages and bacon do a much better job of selling themselves, aided by the sound design. Listen to that sizzle.
We'll feature some big and tasty names, so make sure you tune in to Walls.
Look at them all plump and moist. Probably full of bread, though. Support your local butcher.
Walls sausages and bacon. No other breakfast television tastes as good.
And so on to Daybreak. Make the most of this show because it won't be here long. An hour-long, in-depth news and current affairs programme tonally positioned halfway between News at 10 and Newsnight at 6 o'clock every weekday morning. Good luck with that. I mean, it could still have potentially worked, but it was so punishingly dry and colourless and dead-eyed and hosted by Robert Key, who was a journalist of great distinction, but about as comfortable as a news anchor as Jerry Falwell in a gay bar. After about 10 minutes or so, it takes the tiniest of breathers. Once again, between time slot and equity, TVAM were able to rustle up only one single advert here. And again, regular viewers will know what it was already.
Wake up to what Pi is doing.
Pi were one of the earliest and most venerable of British electronics brands, but by now they were stumbling towards obsolescence. To be fair, they were on something of a second wind in 1983, with their audio equipment inexplicably popular with college students and the like. The surname of the young ones, Neil, might very well be a tribute. Unfortunately, college students are unlikely to have been watching the television at 6 in the morning, a statement as true in 1983 when it was new as it is now when it's standard.
The Pi Tube Cube, your next clock radio, cassette recorder and breakfast TV, all in one.
All that takes a bit of passing. Your next, at the start there, as if purchase is inevitable, is some fairly desperate ad copy, as if to see this thing is to want one. Which now I think of it may actually be literally true. I mean, I want one. But to act like it in the script just makes you look weird and needy. And then there's the incongruous insertion of the word breakfast. This isn't the first, and it won't be the last time an advert on Day 1 TVAM mentions the fact that it's the morning. Pi do it in both the wake-up premise and by smashing the word breakfast in the product description. I mean, presumably the Tube Cube functioned at other times of day as well, but what they were trying to do here was invent the concept of breakfast television as an alternative to breakfast radio. Something you put in the corner of the kitchen and let blare to itself while you're pouring your cornflakes. The way we already did and do with the Today programme or the Radio 1 breakfast show. That's what the Tube Cube was for. You could switch from Mike Reed to TVAM, one scenario where the early TVAM really did have an argument for being the superior option, at the touch of a button. Or eschew both and just put on your tape of Santana's Abraxas, all on the same machine. Transistors were making it possible to make TVs wee enough to discreetly ensconce in a corner, or even carry around if you had to. Breakfast television, as a term for a version of the appliance itself, didn't catch on, because the association with breakfast just wasn't that impressive for that long. But a second portable set in the kitchen soon became fairly commonplace. Of course, by then, Pi was dead.
The Pi Tube Cube. Clock radio, cassette recorder and breakfast TV, all in one. Wake up to what Pi is doing.
Hello, good morning. If you just joined us, it's 6:15 on Tuesday, February the 1st.
So at this point, TVAM are trying to establish an efficient pattern of a break every 10 minutes to a quarter hour. They inevitably fail before Day 1 is over, but it's on track so far as Daybreak's second and the station's third break makes it on air at 6:29.
Well, it's now 29 minutes past 6. We'll be back in a minute with more news and more sport.
This break is actually the first to contain 2 whole adverts, but unfortunately the first one is missing from my footage bar the opening frame. Sounds important. Unfortunately, we'll never find out what that message is, because the recording disintegrates into static at this point and forms up just in time for the start of the next advert. Don't worry, you will find out what it's for later on.
Make today your Mace shopping day. Make it Mace.
This was a time when grocery shopping was, for many, a 2-layered experience. Mace was one of several chains of cupboard-sized grocery stores where you could buy more or less everything you needed on a very basic level. Whereas if you wanted such as fresh fruits and vegetables and exotic things like shampoo and conditioner in the same bottle, you had to go to the supermarket across town. That's certainly how it was for those of us who lived in small towns, like my family. And there's a part of me that kind of misses that setup.
Mace Cornflakes 49p.
Make it Mace.
Daz Automatic 65p.
Make it Mace.
I don't find it inconvenient to go to more than one shop at a time. In fact, getting everything under one roof starts to feel like the Soviet Union. To an extent I complain too much, there is still a surprising amount of these brands still alive. Premier, Budgeons, Londis, Happy Shopper, albeit as a brand and not a shop, Nizer, and indeed Mace itself, all survive to this day in some form or another, although the king of the symbol groups is obviously Spar. It's just more pleasant and human buying your groceries from essentially someone else's house, as opposed to a giant impersonal mothership on the outskirts of town.
Mace baked beans, 19.5p.
One tiny detail that now sticks out like a sore thumb. Yes, we did in fact still use the halfpenny in 1983. They were all but worthless, to the point where people didn't pick them up when they dropped them, but they still existed. Their utility was almost solely as a piece of treasury gamesmanship against inflation. And yet they did still exist. They were only scrapped a year later, after they finally crossed the line of being more expensive to produce than their actual face value, leaving the Exchequer with no other choice. And nothing of value was lost. Almost literally.
Shopping for the odd thing or shopping for the week, you'll find your local Mace store has all your neighborhood needs.
So Daybreak lasted a full punishing hour, at least it did in its first 3 weeks, but here on day one, TVAM ultimately failed outright to produce any adverts at all for the remaining half hour. Its last ad break was filled instead by a complete rerun of the title sequence. Nor were there any takers for the ostensible slot between Daybreak and the first proper edition of Good Morning Britain. So the next actual set of commercials don't arrive until 7:10. But to everyone at Breakfast Television Centre's relief, it was an actual set of adverts, as in more than 2. Still couldn't make it run beyond a minute, but it's quantity that counts. This one's coming out for Weather Report, and as you may recall, TVAM's weather in its earliest days was hosted by Commander David Philpott, pretty much the exact opposite of Ulrika Johnson. He and David Frost are swapping some anecdote-related banter, during which Frost demonstrates his utter disregard for timing and efficiency, despite being the most experienced of the famous 5 in live television.
What were you doing on the 7th floor of the Fontainebleau?
Representing my Queen and country, sir. On duty.
And if you believe...
Infuriated his co-hosts and the TVAM techies no end, although the latter at least in this case has the option of cutting him off in mid-sentence, because this is the scheduled time for the commercial break, goddammit. And this one has real-life people in it, starting with a decidedly eerie spot for Sainsbury's, I guess. Although you never see the logo or anything.
Good morning. Here's the latest good food news from Sainsbury's. If you like a cup of coffee but prefer it without caffeine,
then there's something wrong with you.
You'll enjoy Sainsbury's Gold Choice decaffeinated coffee at only £1.12 for 100 grams. It'll wake you up in the morning, but it won't keep you awake at night. Listen out for more good food news from Sainsbury's.
So yeah, that's the whole thing. An Annika Wills lookalike making a cup of decaf coffee on a rudimentary kitchen set. She makes it, and she drinks it, and she smiles down the lens, and she tells us that Sainsbury's has a wonderful plan for our life. And then she leaves, without on-screen text or non-diegetic sound. Adverts aren't supposed to be this direct and simple. It feels wrong. I don't know if Sainsbury's were worried that people who'd just woken up would need talking to like children, which, I mean, is fair enough. I mean, I do. Either way, it's decidedly odd, and probably an example of how no one knew what to do with the adverts on breakfast television yet. The time slot is definitely on their mind. She's talking about breakfast and standing at a breakfast table and making a breakfast drink because breakfast television breakfast. The next advert's simple too, but it does at least have a pack shot and a voiceover, and even a diagram.
stuffed up, can't breathe? Get catarrh relief with Mucron tablets. Mucron's special formula clears nasal passages for fast relief from stuffy catarrh.
Well, it is February, remember? Viewers are probably bunged up just like this unfortunate mime lady who presumably isn't in equity, poking at her sinuses. The highly appetisingly named Mucron to the rescue. Advertising on TVAM would soon come to have a decidedly feminine feel, as the advertisers came to realise that the main demographic was indeed women, quite often watching as they prepared to see off their working husbands and or school kids. To be fair, as we've already seen and will continue to see, they more or less assumed that from the start. But to be perfectly honest, at this point such strategic thinking was largely irrelevant. TVAM would have broadcast an advert for 10-inch vibrating black annihilators as long as they got paid for it. Mind you, that still would have fitted the demographic.
Beautiful hair, in a nutshell. New Alberto Jojoba. Shampoos and conditioners.
Alberto Jojoba, the thick brother of Alberto Balsam, who doesn't understand punctuation. Although he can rock a rudimentary visual metaphor. Finally...
Morning, I'm Ian Melrose, I'm from Walls.
Repeating this one already. That can't be good. After which Frost is back with an expression that's not inconsistent with a man who just finished beating a techie to death with his bare hands. So we march on towards 8 o'clock, and as more and more people wake up, Peter J. and David Frost, with their precious mission to explain, think it would be just splendid if bleary-eyed viewers across the nation were greeted with a punishingly long interview with Norman Tebbit about why he hates the poor. To make matters worse, Frost still doesn't give a flying one about the precisely timed schedule and refuses to curtail the interview. Finally, they get him to shut the fuck up and squeeze out a commercial break.
Anna. You're going to take a break there? We'll be back in a moment with a big gambler.
The first advert is probably the most expensive and classy one you'll see all morning, and you'll see it repeatedly.
This is the most aerodynamic production car in the world.
The purring voice of Anton Rogers, very popular in advertising at this time, for obvious reasons.
A new Audi 100. If it had the same drag factor as the average car, it would register 0.43, which would feel something like this. But the new Audi 100 actually has a drag factor of only 0.30. And naturally, the less a car has holding it back, the less fuel it needs to drive it forward. The Audi 100.
So in summary, it's like you've only got 4 parachutes behind you instead of 5. Well, that's better, no question. And it's a visual metaphor that, fortunately for everyone involved, didn't feature any visible real people. And it was in service of a real high-class product that you're just as likely to see advertised during Coronation Street.
The most aerodynamic production car in the world.
Next is what appears to be an unfinished spot for The Guardian, which seems to be structured in reverse.
I've always very much admired the doyen of political writers, James Cameron, who is a sane voice in a mad world.
See? Starts with the logo, cuts to George Meddy praising James Cameron, not the director, no one's heard of him yet. And then it stops, abruptly, point made. By The Guardian, it's got James Cameron in it, plus whatever that scrolling text was all about. So that's all they could rustle up for adverts. Total number of acting appearances 0. But 30 more seconds are filled by a trailer for a programme on tonight's afternoon news at 10. In all ITV regions, presumably, or at least most of them. But clearly made by Granada because it has the voice of Jim Pope.
1963, the Profumo affair, Britain's most sensational sex and spies scandal. Government ministers, secret policemen and call girls were summoned to appear before Lord Denning.
The government were in a turmoil because Mr. Profumo, the Secretary of State for War, had brought about a very embarrassing position
Lord Denning recalls some of his most famous cases in A Law Unto Himself, tonight at 10:30.
I would expect more focus on his most famous hour, the Profumo affair, and probably very little, if any, mention of the time he ruined his reputation by saying the Birmingham Six should be allowed to appeal just in case they were right, because it would be very embarrassing for the government. They did, they were, and it was, incidentally. You'll notice that things are already visibly slipping out of all control. That feeling will only deepen with the next commercial break, largely because it comes a mere 3 minutes later.
Now woman's own stands on its own.
You see what I mean about assuming the audience.
All the things I need, all I like to read.
The increasingly distant days when women's magazines were essentially benevolent, and not the nightmare pulp horror of today. No visible humans except Rula Lenska on the cover, no audible humans except a jingle based slightly randomly on the Big Bopper's version of Chantilly Lace, which was Woman's Own's theme throughout the 80s for some reason.
Woman's own, you know what I like.
Vichy Skincare brings a new feeling of freshness to your morning.
Vichy Skincare, for a woman who doesn't like Nazi collaboration, but is capable of rationalising it away. J.K. Rowling, this is for you. It is an odd name to choose, isn't it? I mean, I assume the company was founded there, and that's fair enough, but there is only one thing that place is famous for, and it's not moisturiser. Anyway, enjoy another self-consciously morning-centric one.
Tonic of the morning. It's surprisingly new and simple because it's smooth, like a milk. But on your skin, it feels so refreshing, just like a tonic. So in just one step, your skin is quickly cleansed and toned, and you're off to a fresh new day.
Okay, this fishy cream stuff apparently is made of crack cocaine and caffeine. That's handy.
With the fresh new feeling of tonic of the morning. From Vichy.
A Noah Baumbach film.
Off you go then, Kev.
Get used to these characters because Tefal, for it is they, made a significant contribution to the opening day with their award-winning series about the apparently developmentally disabled Kevin, his patient mothering girlfriend, or possibly wife, and her terrifying hyper-archetype of a mother. The premise is that Kevin doesn't understand domestic appliances. Girlfriend, or whatever, guides him through them, with and without her mother's supervision.
You'll be opening tins next.
As I said, this is award-winning. Best Campaign Series, 1984. Well, if nothing else, it is quite notable for turning traditional advertising sexism on its head over a decade before it became fashionable. Sort of.
The Tefal coffee maker. So simple, even Kevin can use it.
Finally, we get to find out what that message to all motorists was about. Given how short it seems to have been, I get the feeling that the notice in the earlier break may have been a preview for this commercial. A stay tuned for a message.
Don't renew your car insurance until you've checked it against a free AA auto quote.
Well, if you did stay tuned for a full hour, there's your reward. Patrick Allen bellowing at you not to get your car insurance renewed until you've rung up the AA and found out what kind of Swedish deals they have for you.
Dial 100 and ask for free phone AA auto quote.
Now the next break is an oddity. I'd even call it unique. I've certainly never seen another one like it, and it's almost certainly a result of the equity problem and TVAM's desperation. Here's how it starts. So your first thought is that we're not 2 hours in and TVAM is already desperate enough to resort to advertising for advertisers. And that's true. But there's more to it than that. A lot of the deets are obscured by the time code, but you get the general idea. Mazius declares something called a Mazius quiz break. Ring that number, answer a question, first correct answer wins a Panasonic TV of some kind. Even Google has never heard of this. It might well be something they only tried this once, or maybe over the first week or two of TVAM. There's no way of telling from this whether the commercial break is the time limit for such an activity, or whether the commercials themselves also made up the subject matter of the quiz, like an observation test or some damn thing like they had on Krypton Factor. The way the adverts are set up suggests that might very well be what we have on our hands here. They're all for breakfast products, and there are no visible or audible humans anywhere in the entire thing, bar a hand or two. So to the adverts themselves. Oh, it's an Albino 2001 A Space Odyssey. No, of course not. It's breakfast cereal, appropriately timed cheers. Surprisingly the only breakfast cereal advertised on day one. Alpenar, the nation's favourite muesli, for what that's worth. And now they're making a porridge. Let joy be unconfined. Cook their porridge tomorrow and see TCR 0747 4009. I'd love to know what that actually says, even though it's certain to be almost violently underwhelming. Oh hell, not Melrose again. No, not this time. This bacon is Danish, and therefore superior. If you're wondering what the Danish did to their bacon that made it so special, the answer is nothing. They just had a really good export business and an even better marketing department. The bacon itself is just bacon. No better or worse than what you get down the co-op. But probably not as good as your local butcher. In fact, the Danes had a complete stranglehold on our bacon sandwiches at the time. We'd just been commanded to insist on their bacon, and now we're expected to butter the bread it lay between with Lurpak. Which this advert insists is the finest butter in the world. Strong words. Douglas the Butterman won't be born for a few years, so here's some fetishisation of the product instead. The eerie wordlessness is starting to get to me. It's like there will come soft rains. Oh, let me end on a quick reminder that this has been Amazia's quiz break, and here's the number to call. I wonder who won the Panasonic. Well, somebody probably did. People actually did watch day one. If only this was the oddest TVAM ever got, or even only on its first day. So now it's 8:10 and we more or less know where we are now. Regular viewers will know that stuff adverts for whole industries rather than specific brands, tend to be easy gets for stations with advertising space that needs filling. You might even consider it something of a surprise that we haven't seen any yet. Welp.
If an eggshell is all that stands between you and the goodness you need to go walkies, speak to it kindly and just say very firmly, "Hawkies."
Eggs! Eggs are for breakfast. TVAM has, for some reason, decided to base its identity around eggs. Eggs are wacky! All circus music and eggs bouncing about the place. All the patented Monty Python 16-ton weight, which apparently fries the egg as it crushes it. That's actually quite neat. Well, it would be if I liked eggs.
Eggs are smashing. Go smash an egg.
Eggs! And a visible human. Albeit a non-equity member. More actual people in the next advert, which is also the last one in the break because TVAM couldn't give it away.
You're going to have to learn to boil a kettle someday, Kevin. And our new Tefal Sprint could hardly be quicker.
It's Kevin again. This time he's learning how to boil the kettle, which is such a simple task they actually really have to try very hard to find a way for him to mess it up in the end.
Now, fill the kettle from the tap. Now plug it in, switch on, and wait. Now pour it out. Nice try, Kevin.
This one is why I think he's developmentally disabled.
The Tefal Sprint. It's a bit too quick for Kevin.
If you're wondering why some of these do actually have actual actors in, despite Equity being a closed shop at the time, the answer is, I don't know, I wasn't there, or indeed born. Some kind of contractual voodoo, no doubt.
See you in a moment.
The efforts are really starting to dry up as we pass 8 AM, despite more people being awake. 20 past 8 and we start with that Audi again.
This is the most aerodynamic production car.
Yeah, we heard you the first time.
The new Audi 100.
I get the feeling this advert must have been quite fiddly to make. The insurance, health and safety and the like,
which would feel something like this.
Nothing else must be bloody annoying to drive a hatchback with 5 parachutes behind it, and then keep going in a straight line when one of them gets shot off.
The production car in the world.
Second advert's pretty unique though.
Could you imagine life without newspapers? Wouldn't you miss the crossword and page 3? What's on at the cinema, the share prices, the race cards, the cartoons, the stars, the sport, the pulls, and the news, of course, in depth and in detail. Oh, and there's one other nice thing about a newspaper too. Now, what was it? Pick up the news on a portable, buy a newspaper.
Yeah, I have no idea who this actually came from. The Newspaper Marketing Board? Typesetters Union? But it's a stuff advert for the concept of newspapers in general, smack bang in the middle of enemy territory. Because one of the many arguments against breakfast television was that it would hurt the newspaper industry if people got their morning briefing from the telly instead. This turned out to be largely paranoia, of course, but from our futuristic perspective it's interesting to look back on.
Could you imagine life without newspapers?
Well, newspapery the newspaper sprite, if that is your real name, Bob Carroll G's. 40 years later, we're at the point where we barely need to. Because the internet has come along and changed the playing field unrecognisably, in ways that render most of your dire warnings here completely irrelevant.
Wouldn't you miss the crossword?
We could download one of 1,000 free crossword apps.
What's on at the cinema?
We can visit the cinema's website and find out.
And the news, of course, in depth and in detail.
The BBC News website, right-wing slant notwithstanding, covers the news and sport in greater depth and detail than any newspaper ever could. And as for the newspaper's ultimate trump card, its portability, tablet motherfucking computers, bitch. But that's all for the future. A future TVAM wouldn't even come close to seeing. This is basically 1983's equivalent of old media going on new media to say it's shit, stick with us. At least it features actual visible human actors, including the late Howard Lew Lewis. One sign of the times.
Wouldn't you miss the crossword and page 3?
Yeah, page 3 being casually mentioned in almost throwaway fashion, as an ordinary, if essential and certainly unobjectionable, part of British life. Finally, some blobs and a breakfast TV related competition.
There are 370 Binatone TVs to be won in our breakfast TV competition. Free entry forms from your local Rumbelows.
Ooh, just my cup of tea.
Win this portable telly. Perfect for placing on the kitchen table to watch Norman Tebbit drone on and fucking on while you dip your soldiers. These adorable little blob things I don't think had much longer to go as the company's spokesbeings, because it was thoroughly the 80s by now, and electronics was supposed to be cool and futuristic. And Una Stubbs was lovely, but she wasn't cool and futuristic. The next break at 8:30 consisted solely of that Audi advert yet again, so we'll skip past it altogether and go on to the next one, which is also full of repeats, as you'll see, but I wanted in particular to mention the segment it was interrupting. TVAM's living comic strip, The World of Melanie Parker. And this was one of the oddest ideas anyone ever had for TVAM, including John Noakes and Tony Arthur as hosts of Good Morning Britain. Sadly, all that's left of it in the public domain is the last 30 seconds.
That's what I said. Blackmail.
Which tells you nothing. Don't worry, it is still connected to advertising, if that still matters at this point, because it was based on a set of radio adverts for Augustus Barnett wine merchants that purported to be a serial about an unnaturally chirpy upper-middle-class woman and her lightly surreal village. And that helps me no end, because the original radio adverts do still exist, and I can play one for you to give you an idea of what we're dealing with.
Augustus Barnett proudly presents The World of Melanie Parker.
Do you know that ours is the only village green where, under a royal dispensation from Edward VII, public executions are still officially allowed? Of course, in these more compassionate times, that dispensation is only rarely invoked. Although crusty old Mr. Granger, JP, who insists that dog owners are making a convenience of his front garden, says that if he had his way, he'd top the lot of them. Oh, he's dreadful. And oh dear, his language.
Oi! Yes, you, and your rotten dog.
Oh, goodness, what a welcome, crusty old. And it is a 14th century right of way, you know.
Who's been telling you that, you silly old posset? By the graunch and scruds, just who do you think you are, Melanie Parker?
Who does Melanie Parker think she is? And why is crusty old Mr. Granger JP so crusty? Why does Augustus Barnett carry such an amazingly wide range of wines and spirits? How does he keep his prices so low? Don't miss episode 2 of The World of Melanie Parker tomorrow, brought to you by Augustus Barnett.
You're still baffled, aren't you? Well, imagine that, shot on CSO with cartoonish village backdrops, shorn of the plugs for an off-licence, and stretched to 5 minutes. It seems fairly obviously inspired by Viv Stanchel and Sir Henry at Rawlinson End, maybe with a touch of Beachcomber, without truly understanding the point of either, which is to say that there wasn't one, or the appeal, for that matter. It wasn't very funny on the radio, but at least at 1 minute ago it couldn't outstay its welcome. At 5 times the length, with awkward blue screen performances, it did. It ran for 2 months, but it was moribund as soon as the end of February, and by March it was all but explicitly being burnt off as filler for lack of material. This minute fragment is almost the only visual evidence I can find, without paying a premium to the current owners of TVAM, that it was ever bothered with. As for Augustus Barnett, their Spanish parent company was done for fraud a few years later, and the name eventually disappeared. For some reason I feel like saying that it served them right, although I've no idea why. As for the break itself, the only one that's not an outright repeat might as well be.
Shell who is boss. Let it know that you are cross. Go smash an egg.
Barbara Woodhouse wasn't in Equity, of course. After that there's the Pie Tube Cube again. Buy one. Please buy one. I would. And then the return of Ian Melrose, the man from Pork. Finally, another demand that you go down to Mace right now and buy some baked beans or detergent or something for pennies, or maybe even half pennies. Spent them watching Norman Tebbit talking about breaking the working class down for parts. I'm sure you'll be glad to hear that we're approaching the home stretch now. We just had a consumer affairs slot, hosted by angular tutting machine Lynn Foldswood, who would almost immediately defect at breakfast time to do the same thing, only with the possibility of some people actually watching. Her husband, John Stapleton, would soon join her after his humiliation at the Brighton bombing, and Watchdog was born. But that's another story. Both the station and the advertisers seem to have decided that around 9 is something approaching a prime time of sorts, at least judging by this 8:50 break. There are several adverts here, most of them original, and many of them containing actual human people with equity cards and everything. For example,
Bom dia, quer café?
O café daqui tem sabor da...
yes, John Alderton and Pauline Collins, What Are Married and Such, appearing as usual for Maxwell House in the Algarve, or, Manchester on an unusually sunny day, whatever.
Surpriso.
Maxwell House. O sabor fresco, natural, protegido pela fechadura de sabor da Maxwell House. Oh, a fechadura de sabor, label lock.
I'm going to Torquay next year.
According to Random Me, the Portuguese is bollocks. Collins is just making noises. But she's Pauline Collins, so she gets away with it.
Maxwell House, the good morning taste.
Make sure today's the day you save at Allied Carpet's big sale.
We don't know how to advertise in the morning.
Hundreds of carpets at 25 to 50% off roll price.
Hundreds of carpets at a quarter to half off. A carpet is a utilitarian item to me, and it feels like they're trying to advertise it as an impulse item, which to my carpet-indifferent ears is just dissonant.
Hurry to Allied Carpets today.
New Alberto Jojoba shampoos and conditioners for beautiful hair, in a nutshell.
Trying out the metaphor the other way, I notice. Works just as well, really. The brand's main advantage remains the fact that Alberto Jojoba is just kind of fun to say.
New Alberto Jojoba.
Is it Red Nose Day? No, of course not. It's 1983, you dumb, stupid idiot. It's Edam.
I choose the cheese and it's got to be right. I'm making sure we have a ball tonight. Won't change my mind. Edam is fine. Goodness gracious, great for the cheese.
For some reason, Edam was fashionable in the 80s. Probably because it was slightly unusual in a way that was considered very correct by cool people in the 80s, coming as it did in inscrutable bright red globes, a la a Duran Duran music video. The cool factor is somewhat offset by the, and I have to say it, cheesiness of the advert itself, playing on the childhood nostalgia of that generation of adults.
It's nice and mild, it's a real Dutch treat. The Edam value can't be beat. I tried the rest, Edam is best.
Goodness gracious.
Great for the cheese.
As for the cheese itself, it's quite nice, but bland. Really quite bland. Which is also very 80s.
Edam, a great ball of cheese.
Finally, the very last break of TVAM Day 1 comes at 9:10, and starts with that frigging Mace advert again. Then one last visit to Kevin and his girlfriend, or wife, or mental health nurse, or whatever, with his fearsome mother-in-law in tow.
Isn't it nice to have Mum to stay, Kevin? We can show off our lovely new Tefal thick and thin toaster. Look, Mum, with this lever it can grip any size slice and brown it all nice and even. From big, chunky doorsteps for my big, chunky Kevin to little slices for me.
Well, those traditional gender roles didn't take long to reassert themselves, did they? Oh well. Kevin even gets the last word, despite apparently not having the power of speech.
Well, go on, dearest. Cut Mum a slice.
The thick and thin toaster from Tefal.
Next is the faux killer exulting over Edam again, possibly before leaving to have sex with a 13-year-old relative. It's not just a shortened version of something we've already seen, though.
Edam makes sense. More for your plans.
Goodness gracious.
Great for the cheese.
Edam, great value too.
You see, it's a little addendum about the stuff's value for money, which might very well have had more to do with its popularity in the 80s than any kind of fashion statement. Getting around the equity thing this time by using royalty-free classical music and scrolling text, which annoyingly runs across the bottom and is largely hidden by the timecode. To be fair, when they made it, they probably won't have considered how people 40 years in the future might want to study it from an on-air recording. Although they may have anticipated my other problem, which is that I keep expecting it to segue into Failed in Wales. Once again, and actually for the last time today, it's full of explicit "it's the morning" imagery. It took a while, but eventually people realised you can just put regular adverts on at breakfast time and the viewer wouldn't explode from confusion at not having the time of day acknowledged.
Think of a meal? Think of New Zealand lamb meal makers.
New Zealand lamb is very nice lamb, I understand. But it can be pretty expensive, at least over here, considering it's imported from about as far away as it gets. But
Quick and easy meal makers. Loin chops when you're in a hurry. Budget meal makers. Neck cut casserole. Makes your budget stretch.
yes, now you can buy chops and shoulders, neck bits and the like under the Meal Makers brand, instead of splashing out on a whole dead sheep from the other side of the world. Much more affordable and just as tasty, I expect.
Family meal makers. Roast whole shoulder for a get-together. And all with the help of Meal Makers New Zealand Lamb.
New Zealand lamb. It's lamb from New Zealand. Of course, Welsh lamb is even better. No, it's not radioactive. And it comes from closer. So buy that instead. Or just support your local butcher. Have I mentioned that yet? Good.
Meal Makers New Zealand Lamb.
Finally, and I do mean finally, the Halifax.
It's happening all over Britain. A little extra help from the Halifax, the world's biggest building society.
The Halifax, but then a building society, of course. The world's biggest, if this advert is to be believed. And didn't quite have the gumption to make an entire house out of people. So they settled for making a giant X on the ground, like a target for flying saucers. Of course, in this context, it feels like a reference to Good Morning Britain. But it isn't.
More than 7.5 million people are making the future just a little more certain by saving with the Halifax.
There's something oddly confrontational about the voiceover as well, when it reaches the bit about Halifax conditions.
Only one thing the Halifax insists on. You must take out more money than you put in.
You understand? You must take out more than you put in. And then someday, and that day may never come, the Halifax will call upon you to do a service for them. If that sounds fair to you, you bastard, join now.
If that sounds fair, get a little extra help from the Halifax.
Well, that took a long time. Even longer for the poor sods involved, of course. Day one ends as it began, with the five gathered together on the sofa again, telling each other how much they enjoyed it, in a way not inconsistent with reciting a pre-prepared script. David Frost gives an Alan Partridge-like closing statement.
And if it's all right with you, we'd like to come again tomorrow. Good morning.
Good morning.
And then takes the opportunity to inappropriately touch the legs of his female colleagues. All in fun, I'm sure. This first day got some decent ratings by dint of being the first day. But few returned for more even the following morning, and the returns diminished until very nearly reaching absolute zero. And there were clues right here on day one that this was going to be a struggle. That includes the adverts. Never have so few had to cover so many slots for so little gain. I know they had to pay for themselves, and that ultimately even this wasn't adequate to do that, but it probably didn't help TVAM or its presenters that the show was so fragmented, stopping every 10 minutes, albeit only for 1 or 2 adverts at a time. It's no wonder there was so little rhythm, chemistry or momentum. And obviously their one rival Breakfast Time didn't have to worry about that at all. As with almost every day of TVAM's existence, we end on the whimsical copyright egg cup, one of the few things from the original TVAM that survived into the station that came to bear its name. The TVAM we all know and love and hate, all the Anne and Nick, Mad Lizzie, Wincy Willis, Lorraine Kelly, Mike Morris, Wide Awake Club business, all that is essentially a completely different station that, Shipper Theseus-like, inherited the name and logo and identity of another one that failed catastrophically inside 2 months. The name TVAM was supposed, as far as its creators were concerned, to come to represent hard news and sophisticated upper-middle-class chat. And they might even, with an almighty effort, manage to carve out a place for such a service in the mornings. Although given the ratings are money nature of commercial television, such a thing was never going to be more than 2 feet from impossible. There's a reason that a day programme, which essentially is what David Frost wanted TVAM to be, is on Radio 4 and not Capital FM. But either way we'll never know, because Peter J and David Frost, and the rest of the famous 5, were all lofty ideals and no actual plan for running a TV station on a daily basis. And on top of that, their luck was for shit. So TVAM collapsed, and what came in its place looked like it, and walked and talked and everything, and it even had a few of the same people. But it wasn't the same thing. Eventually it was better. Not good, but better. And that's 200 episodes. Unless you want to count certain specials and Patreon rewards and a couple of 2-parters, in which case it's actually more. And I reiterate, how the hell I've managed that, I don't know. But don't worry, I'm not stopping now. Apart from anything else, this is the only thing that keeps the lights on. I have to talk bollocks about adverts, or I will quite literally starve or freeze to death. Now that's late-stage capitalism. I used to do this for fun, watching old tapes, fast-forwarding to the adverts and commenting on them to myself. Now, I do it to live. The stick in the swill-bucket, quite literally, rattles back.
We are your morphine vision, we are your sleepless nights, we are your catechism, we are your final rites. We've got your weakness pegged, each break and every bend. You throw a tragedy, we'll always attend. The resurrection man. The resurrection man. The resurrection man. The resurrection man.
That's the pack shot.
You just sat through a Bob the Fish production. Nice! If you haven't already, you absolutely must check out bobthefish.org.uk. Literally hundreds more videos not unlike that one, adding up to days worth of entertainment and all absolutely free. But if you're not a cold-hearted skinflint, you can always support us on Patreon. For as little as anything at all, you can make programs like the one you just watched possible in the first place, and become eligible for bonus material such as glimpses of the book I'm writing about the BBC, monthly riffings on random commercial breaks, the complete archives of the angry political satire magazine Two Sons, and even the odd very occasional bonus video essay unavailable anywhere else. If nothing else, you should prevent me from starving and or freezing to death in the foreseeable future, so that'd be nice. No pressure or anything. Well, UK, you make it what it is.